Good evening, distinguished guests on and off the days, and particularly some veteran model civil servants whose very presence here this evening enthuses us. Destiny has kindly added years to their lives. They have wisely added life to their years. I'm deeply sensible of the honor of this invitation to be here this evening at the release of the Public Affairs Index 2022, which, as we have all seen, has been a very rigorous and profound exercise for which I think, as responsible citizens, we should all be indebted to the Public Affairs Center. The aspiration to make power and its exercise accountable has been the motivation for constitutions and constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is essentially an attempt to establish the supremacy of law. Men throughout history have longed for a higher standard by which their own man made laws are tested. Constitutions are that higher standard. The belief that individuals have natural rights, inherent and inalienable, which are anterior to any written instrument like a constitution, that governments acquire authority from the people, that the purpose of government is to promote the common good, is what conceives and conceptualizes a constitution made in the name of the people, defining the parts of the main institutions and delineating the relationship between various organs of government and between the government and the citizens. It is framed for ages to come and designed to approach immortality as much as human institutions can. The advent of democracy and limited government heralded the concept of state and transformed the status of the governed to the citizens. Civilizations involve the subjection of force to reason. The agency of that subjection is the law. Law, and even more, constitutional law, is the means of ordering the life of a nation and the relations between man and state. Constitution refers to a document like the Constitution of India, the Constitution of the United States, while constitutional law refers to the justiciable parts of the document, those rules that have been evolved by the courts in enforcing those justiciable parts. Conventions and customs are all part of constitutional law. A constitution, as we all know, is the very life breath of a nation and the vehicle for its progress. It is the country's supreme law. Very broadly speaking, it's about division, distribution, and management of state power so as to avoid arbitrariness and establish accountability to law. It's a framework of political society organized through and by law, in which law has established permanent institutions with recognized functions and defined powers. A constitutional state, of course, we all have states, but a constitutional state is one in which the powers of the government, the rights of the governed, and the relations between them are adjusted. The term constitutional government is applied only to those governments whose fundamental rules or maxims not only locate the sovereign power in some persons or bodies chosen in some prescribed manner, but also define the limits of its exercise so as to protect individual rights and shield them against the exercise of arbitrary power. All states purport to have constitutions, even Soviet Russia, the Republic of China, the so-called communist states also have constitutions and purport to govern people for their welfare. But what distinguishes the democratic state from a totalitarian one is that a free democratic state respects basic human rights, and endeavors to achieve its objectives through the medium of fundamental freedoms. That is what constitutional government really signifies. The mere existence of a constitution by itself does not mean much and would not ensure constitutionalism or constitutional culture. Constitutionalism is essentially limited government of enumerated powers under a fundamental law. It signifies that the exercise of power should be controlled to ensure that it does not destroy the very values for which it was set up. It emphasizes that institutional arrangements must provide for effective control of the abuse of power. Absolute power is avoided by diffusion of authority, which introduces checks and balances in the system. A politically neutral civil service, an independent police force, an independent academic and practicing legal profession, a free press reflecting diverse points of view, and of course, an independent judiciary are considered essential concomitants of constitutionalism. A constitutional democracy is one where the majority will and rule are controlled and directed by principles of the Constitution. And the successful working of a constitutional democracy depends not upon mere allegiance to the words of the Constitution, the constitutional provisions alone, but imbibing a constitutional culture. This cannot be inherited in the bloodstream. It is to be cherished and nourished from generation to generation. It underlines the need to preserve people's faith in constitutional institutions and institutional safeguards. The aim of good government being to bring about the security, welfare, and happiness of the people. And of the different forms of government devised by man, democratic government with a Bill of Rights comes closest to the ideal. The Constitution being the supreme law, no organ or institution has unfettered powers. All derive their powers from the Constitution and have to function within those limits. In a constitutional democracy wedded to the rule of law, what prevails is constitutional supremacy. There is no organ, no wing, no institution is supreme. All have powers derived from the Constitution to which they must adhere. It is the Constitution alone that is supreme. And in countries like ours, with a written Constitution and an entrenched Bill of Rights, what prevails is constitutional supremacy. The structure of government is so designed that each branch is a sentinel on the highway against the other two, lest they become too powerful or autocratic. At least this is the theory. How far it really translates into practice is another issue, but on the whole, I think we can be proud of our achievements. Rule of law is the subordination or subservience of the executive to the legislative will, that every executive action must be backed by legislative support. Under rule of law, law is preeminent and a check against abuse of power. While under rule by law, law can serve as an instrument of governmental oppression. And rule of law does not content itself with ensuring legality. It goes further to speculate on the limits of the extent of powers that governments can have. Question is not just what legal authority government has for what it seeks to do. More significantly, it is what legal powers ought government to have. As Lord Acton said, what is important is not what you prescribe, but what you can prescribe, for no prescription is valid against the conscience of mankind. The rule of law permeates the entire Constitution, which is meant to impart a momentum to the living spirit that democracy and liberty may survive in India beyond our own times. But in countries like ours with a written Constitution, even the legislature is subordinate to constitutional rights, values, and limitations. And that brings in the concept of the reign of law. The legislative power, too, being subject to constitutional limitations. And therefore, we have in India not only the rule of law, but also what is called the absolute reign of law. A written constitution with Bill of Rights seeks to place certain human rights and fundamental freedoms beyond the reach of ordinary laws, because these rights do not depend on the whims of an immoral majority or the outcome of any election. And this is particularly so as regards the most precious rights to life and freedom, life and liberty. Such rights are not the gift of the Constitution. They are not conferred by the Constitution. As Professor Edward Corwin said, they owe nothing to the Constitution. The recognition, instruments like Bills of Rights and constitutions respond to recognizing these fundamental rights, and such recognition is necessary if a constitution is to be complete. These fundamental rights are innate and inalienable because they are grounded in the very nature of man. It is a material what they are called. And when human rights are incorporated into the municipal law and guaranteed by a written constitution, they are generally called fundamental rights and are justiciable. The largest experiment ever undertaken in human history in the art of democratic living and governance has been carried on in India since 1950. Never before and nowhere else has about 1/6 of the human race lived as one political entity under conditions of freedom. I think this is something which we as Indians can and ought to be really proud of, in spite of whatever drawbacks, whatever problems we may face. And remember, we are like an oasis in the surrounding desert. None of our neighbors has democracy. None of our neighbors has a justiciable constitution. In none of our neighboring countries are people really free. We have our problems, no doubt about that, but still we are really something to be proud of. The Constitution represents a charter of power granted by liberty, not a charter of liberty granted by power. Because apart from providing a broad framework of government, it endeavors to protect liberties and secure justice. That's the constitutional vision and the goal. The Constitution seeks to provide for stability without stagnation and for growth without destruction of essential values. A majority of the provisions are aimed at furthering the goals of the social revolution to which we committed ourselves during the struggle for independence and at the framing of the Constitution. The core of this commitment lies in parts 3 and 4, the fundamental rights and directive principles, which together with fundamental duties, because no one can speak of a right without doing his own duty, and the preamble encapsulates the constitutional vision, which may be said to be the conscience of the Constitution. The justice provisions in Part 4, the directive principles, though not justiciable, are declared fundamental to the governance of the country and underlie all human development. Democracy is not just a legal, constitutional, or formal concept. It is as much a social idea. As Dr. Ambedkar said in the Constituent Assembly, social democracy means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, fraternity as the principles of life which form a trinity. To divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. It's the confluence of these principles which leads to the securing of justice. In fact, John Rawls, the great political scientist, says justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as truth is of the system of thoughts. Now, civilization may be said to be the degree to which men are sensible to wrongdoing and endeavor to set it right. The hallmark of a society claiming to be civilized, it's its ability to do justice. A state is successful when people have the confidence and assurance that they are living in a just society under protection of law and an adequate legal system. The function of the judiciary is to act as a civilizing force in the body politic. Justice is what the index also speaks of, the preamble speaks of. In fact, that's the very first word: justice, social, economic, and political. I think that underlines the entire constitutional vision and all the provisions that go to make it work for us. Justice is a synthesis of liberty, equality, and fraternity, a common thread that runs through all these values and makes them parts of an integrated whole. It reconciles conflicts and contradictions. It's the final goal to which liberty, equality, and fraternity should conform. We thus see the fusion and intermingling of the preambular objectives and realize how important they are. When we speak of justice, we do not mean justice in an ideal sense. That is the attribute of the divine. We are talking at the human plane. We mean a regime, an adjustment of relations, ordering of conduct, as will make the goods of existence, the means of satisfying human claims, to have and to do things go round as far as possible without friction and waste. Justice implies a harmonizing reconciliation of individual conduct with general welfare. Now, equality of opportunity is the soul of social justice, which is perhaps the most important foundational concept that supports the democratic polity. Wealth has a social mission and must find expression and fulfillment in human well-being. With a sensible balance of economic growth and advancement of the welfare of the people as a whole. That would be economic justice. And political justice is the healthy maintenance of the checks and balances in the constitutional scheme and the legitimacy of democratic institutions. The legitimacy of democratic institutions brings us to the idea of electoral reforms, because a free and fair election is a sine qua non for a successful democracy. It also brings in the need for reforms of political parties, because it is through political parties that we work our democracy. Of course, these are two topics that on which we could talk a lot separately, but I am just emphasizing the need and importance of these two. Without social justice, economic justice cannot be secured, and it's only when a citizenry has secured both social and economic justice that we can claim to deserve political justice. India is an indestructible union of states, as the Constitution describes it. The concept of federalism basically involves distribution of powers between the center of the federation and the federating units. Dr. Ambedkar, moving the draft constitution, explained the significance of the use of the expression union. India is not a federation of states. India is an indestructible union of states, saying that the expression is deliberate. For though divided into different states for the convenience of administration, the country is one integral whole. Its people, a single people living under a single imperium derived from a single source. The basic principle of federalism is that legislative and executive authority is partitioned by the Constitution itself, not by any law made thereafter. And that, of course, we find in the Constitution. And therefore, what we really have is a cooperative federation of states with a bias in favor of the union, which within reasonable limits is undoubtedly necessary, having regard to conditions prevailing in our country. It is axiomatic that the success and strength of a federal polity involving dual governments and division of powers depend upon the maximum cooperation and coordination between governments. That brings in the idea of cooperative federalism. Even in an orthodox system of federalism with sharp division of powers like the United States of America, almost for the last 100 years, it has been realized that what is necessary is cooperation, and even they tend towards cooperative federalism. In India, it has always been recognized both by governments and by courts that the purposes of both union and states would be best served in the national interest if the union and the states, both legislatively and administratively, work in cooperation. The constitutional reforms heralded by the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments relating to rural and urban local bodies have potential for what we may call a three-tier federation, not just the union and the states, but the union, states, and the local bodies. Of course, this is the ideal which the Constitution Amendment envisaged. They point to changes in the political institutions in India emerging as a pattern towards multi-level federalism, or what is called an idea of federation of federations. You have even state finance commissions to review the financial position of local bodies. The idea is for a village panchayat to be a unit of self-government, to promote social justice and economic development. This is devolution of powers and decentralization of government so that local bodies are not just executing agencies. This is a powerful tool of social engineering. However, it is important that these provisions are sincerely implemented and meaningfully worked. Federal governments are not the offspring of political science, but the product of socio-economic forces. And federalism is just another idea like any other idea in government. It is, we must note, an evolving concept, not frozen in time or content. Now, realizing the constitutional vision of justice is what really good governance is. The consummation of the Constitution would be reached when justice reaches out to everyone, everywhere, as mandated by the Constitution. Our nation state has been striving to entrench the constitutional vision of justice and achieve the constitutional goals. Public Affairs Index seeks to objectively and rigorously assess performance of governments in endeavoring to provide good governance and make the constitutional vision of justice a reality. It's my sincere hope that in the years to come, the Public Affairs Center will assess not only the performance of state governments, very important though it is, but also the performance of the union government. Constitutionalism facilitates a democratic political system by creating an orderly framework in which decisions are made. A cultivated respect for law and enduring institutions is absolutely important. An unfailing index to the maturity of a democracy is the degree of respect for unwritten conventions. What is unsaid in a constitution is as important as what is said. And constitutional equilibrium may be preserved when we can enforce obedience to the unenforceable. The realization of all this depends upon the recognition that constitutional morality is no less significant and necessary than constitutional legality. And the people at large have a significant role in this exercise because the highest office in a democracy, as Justice Frankfurter reminded us, is that of the citizen. Debate and dissent are the heartbeats of democracy. The right to protest, however, entails the duty to listen to other voices and shun rigidity or intolerance. Governments, too, have to be responsible and responsive. Law must reflect the general will of the people, which has evolved as a consensus through informed debates and discussion. And the most effectual means of preventing perversion of power and preserving the democratic republic is to illuminate the minds of the people at large. I think this is the greatest duty of any responsible government. And this is of utmost need and importance today. There are dangers that a constitutional state and the people have always to be on the guard. It is necessary to build, nurture, and cherish a culture of constitutionalism, which is not merely regard and adherence to the form and letter, but a commitment to the substance, which is respect for and adherence to the rule of law, which, as someone said, is the tribute paid by power to reason. You have to discipline the exercise of power. That indeed is constitutional morality. When we say constitutional morality, it is not that the moral content of any law can be judged by the courts. The moral content of a law has always to be, the final voice has to be with the people and the people's representatives. By constitutional morality, the great international lawyer Grote spoke of it, Dr. Ambedkar spoke of it, Palkiwala spoke of it, by constitutional morality, Dicey spoke of it. By constitutional morality, what we mean is an adherence to constitutional principles and conventions, not just the letter of the law. And in realizing this, there is always to be an unremitting endeavor. Constitutions, it is said, may be easily copied, temperaments are not. And therefore, constitutional values and aspirations have to be internalized in the psyche of the nation. We need to develop and always have a decorous regard for and play by the rules of the constitutional game. Thank you so much for your patience and courtesy. I'm indeed thankful